Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of learning of path to code. Today we're going to be talking about something really interesting, and we'll carry on from the prelude to what Jitendra said last week about REST APIs. So today we're going to be talking about SOAP APIs. We're going to be talking about how we can use them in building integrations with Salesforce. Before we jump into the specifics of what we are going to cover as a part of the session today, yep, that's me. My name is Jigar Shah, and I'm an enterprise architect with Eternal Solutions. Jigar Shah 189 is my Twitter as well as LinkedIn handle. So even after this session, if you intend to reach out to me for any further questions, feel free to reach out to me on these channels, and I will try to help you to the best of my abilities. So the session for today, for us, for SOAP integration is going to be covering the following things. So we're going to be talking about primarily the need for integration as to what are the reasons why we need integration in today's times, and especially why it is relevant with Salesforce. Then understanding some of the basics of SOAP. What exactly is SOAP? We keep talking about these terms, SOAP, but what exactly it is and how exactly it works. Then we're going to be seeing how we can really consume an external service that is provided to you, how we can consume that in Salesforce and use or write some automation in terms of code on the Salesforce side to make sure that you can leverage that service and get responses from that service. We'll see all the tools which are available and how we can actually do that. Then you're going to be making call outs to the service, and last but not the least, we're going to be looking at how to test these SOAP call outs. So these are termed as SOAP call outs, and testing forms an integral part of any kind of development on the Salesforce platform. So you're going to be seeing how we can really test SOAP call outs. And the most important thing, we're going to leave today's session with some thoughts on when you should end up choosing SOAP callouts, or when do you use SOAP versus REST. So that's a very common question that people often get, and it's sometimes knowing what is the right weapon for you within the available stash is very, very important to provide the right kind of solution. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before that, some housekeeping rules. As usual, if you're not speaking, please mute your mic. Make sure you keep adding questions to the Q&A window, which is the chat window. Do not feel shy. No questions are silly. Everybody's here to learn. So make sure you make the best of this particular opportunity and the session that we're having today. We'll try to answer most of the questions in the last 15 minutes of the session so that we can cover what we have planned for today. But that should not stop you from asking any questions. I have Jitendra from the Path to Code team today with me on the session, and he is also going to be helping us answer some of the questions that you may have. So with that, let's just get started and really understand the purpose of why integration is relevant today, or what exactly is integration, and what is the need for integration today. So usually what happens so let's just first understand what exactly is integration. Guys, just making sure, I hope you guys can still see my screen, right?
Yeah, you got, I can see.
All right, perfect. So what is integration? Integration is basically an activity where two systems, when we're talking about these two systems, they are typically heterogeneous, which means that they have a different way of interpreting information. They use a different technology stack, yet they can communicate with each other easily with the help of certain standards that are available, and which enables to help these systems exchange information amongst each other. So for example, let me give you an example. You could have two .NET systems talking to each other or two Java systems talking to each other, which is pretty straightforward because one Java system talking to another Java system. And when I say Java system, what I really mean is a system that is implemented using the Java technology stack. And when I talk about a .NET system, a system that is implemented using a .NET technology stack. Now, each of these, if one, let's say one Java system is talking to another Java system, both of these systems essentially belong or have been implemented using the same technology stack. And as such, the the exchange of information or exchange of data between these two systems becomes really easy. However, it the complexity increases, or there is a dire need for different types of systems or systems implemented or using different technology stacks. Like it could be an SAP system or an Oracle system, or maybe an IBM WebSphere to talk with uh, some system which is running on a Google server. So this kind of in today's world, this is like the de facto, because there is everybody is using different types of system and they need this ability to communicate, and integration provides us with the ability for these systems to communicate and exchange data with each other. So if you really see the picture over here, this is typically what enterprise landscapes look like, right? So there are cloud platforms, there are certain homegrown systems which are like custom apps. You of course have some of the multiple databases, you have some package solutions, and all these want to talk to each other because there is a lot of information that sits differently, because each of these systems cater to a different purpose, and some of the key pieces of information are distributed across these different systems, and hence it is imperative that these systems talk together, talk to each other to ensure that there is one consistent view of data, because data is fragmented across systems. But there are also reasons like there are legacy systems which are available. So for people who don't really are, or not really conversant with the term legacy, it really refers to older systems which either are being used just I mean, they're old systems, old technology, which are no longer relevant, but they still contain a whole lot of business data, which is relevant even today. Okay, so we often get into these legacy migrations, and we would want our new system to talk to some of these older legacy systems, so as to make sure that we still have access to the old data. So this is one of the reasons why you end up integrating two systems. Another reason could be that, like I said, the data is fragmented across systems, so there is a lot of silo in how this data really exists. And from a strategic perspective, you want this data to be bound together in a way that you get a unified view, and you can make sense out of it, and develop strategies to increase the profitability of your business. So these are some of the common use cases for integration. The other is, you also, sometimes it's more of a data reconciliation activity. For example, a classic case, like you have an SAP back office system which really holds the financial transactions, or maybe the product details, assuming that you have a lot of product SKUs. But Salesforce being your system of reporting, you want to get this data, this account receivables data, and get it over to Salesforce so that you can report on that data and eventually see that, which of your customers, what is the account receivables for each of your customers. Now, this is again a common scenario where an integration will be required, because some of your information resides over in your back office system, and some of it resides in Salesforce, and you want these pieces of information to marry each other and help the users make sense out of it. So see, these are some of the common reasons why you would end up integrating two systems, right? Um, so today the topic that we're really going to be focusing on is how do you really use SOAP as an integration channel, and how it can benefit you. But before we, and what is it that you need to do from a Salesforce perspective to um, leverage SOAP services, right? So before we really get into the specifics, we need to understand what exactly is SOAP. Okay, we keep talking about this term, and I'm sure some of you might have encountered this. But SOAP is nothing but stands for, it's an acronym. It stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. Okay, so it's basically a web protocol which allows, or it's basically a message exchange protocol which allows two systems to exchange messages with each other, right? There is a specific format in which SOAP uses to exchange the messages, and it basically does that using XML. So XML is uh, the markup language available on the web, right? It's a textual language, and what it does, it exchanges the two systems talking to each other as a part of the integration. They will exchange the data in form of messages, which are nothing but XML messages, right? So typically, if you see the diagram here over on the screen in front of you, so there are two basic entities in every integration, right? So you could have one, the one who is actually providing the respective service is the service provider, right? And these are some of the common terminologies which you might want to get used to while building integrations, whether with Salesforce or even with other systems. These are the common terminologies and entities used in a regular integration. So a service provider is somebody uh, who is actually providing the web service. And a service could be anything. It could be a weather service, a weather forecast service, where I'm just providing information based on the input I receive. So so weather service could be a great example of a service that I could provide. Another example of a service could be, uh, you know let's say I subscribe to uh, a service who provides positive thoughts and quotes and maybe jokes, and that is one service that could be provided. So like this, there are n number of services. Okay, so how does a service differentiate or differ from a regular software? A service does does not really have a user interface available, right? All it does, it tells you what kind of input it needs, and gives you the relevant output. For the sake of simplicity, you can just assume a service to be a method written somewhere on the internet, and you have some kind of accessibility to that method, so that you can give it the right input parameters, and it will automatically and intelligently give you back the output in the form of a response. So anything that you uh, you know request for to the service provider is generally termed as a request, right? And anything that you receive in turn as a part of the information that you had requested is generally referred to as a response. Okay, now any entity or any program or any system that is consuming the given service is called as a service consumer. All right, now these are the two main entities, saying that who's providing the services and who's going to be consuming the service. However, there are certain specifics that we need to understand when we say this this information exchange or this message exchange is happening, saying that what is the channel. So it is almost like two people talking to each other on a telephone. So somebody is the one who is going to be you know uh, making a call, who's going to be the provider, and somebody who's going to be receiving it or receiving the information. And what is the channel that they're using? So the channel that they really use to exchange these messages is called as is the HTTP. So it basically uses the HTTP protocol. So HTTP stands for hypertext transfer protocol, right? It is the most common protocol that is used over the web to point to any resource or any kind of service that is available remotely over the internet. Okay, uh, you you might have seen, so any of the URLs that you see in your browsers, always begin with an HTTP or an HTTPS. Okay, HTTPS is a more secured version of the HTTP protocol. It has an additional layer of encryption, and hence it's a more secured version. But HTTP is the de facto standard of communication over the internet. Now, in terms of coming back to SOAP, when you're doing a SOAP based integration, right, we still we still have the service provider as a service consumer. However, the thing that changes in terms of SOAP is the message exchange, and which is what you see as a part of the yellow envelope that is shown in the picture over here. So a SOAP integration typically is a very special way of saying that because SOAP is basically a message exchange format. It determines how the message will be packaged and exchanged between the service provider and the service consumer over the internet. Okay, and SOAP uses an XML format, right? But another interesting thing to understand about the SOAP message is it has a definite structure, right? And a SOAP message is really broken down into four basic pieces: an envelope, a header, a body, and a fault. Okay, so envelope is the general information. So when you say, these are four parts of a message, so it is more of an XML file which has these four sections. There is an envelope section, there is a header, there is a body, and there is a fault. Header is typically to have the most relevant information or some of the common pieces, for example. So header really gives you information about what is the kind of data that is being exchanged over in the SOAP message, and is being really sent over as a part of the body. So body is what actually contains the message data. Okay, so if you're sending a list of students from one system to another, or if you're sending a list of employees, or if you're sending bank information, whatever, based on what your integration process is, body will contain that information. Header will give you uh, the information that will help systems understand what kind of data it is, what is the format, what are the details. A whole There is a ton of things that go inside a header. A fault is basically nothing but a section which tells you that if there is an error encountered but while the exchange happens, so the fault section really you know holds or contains that piece. And believe me, every integration or every information exchange really has these entities, so it is essential uh, that you understand some of these terminologies. Now, we've understood who's providing the service, we've understood who's consuming the service, and how this message exchange is happening when we do a SOAP integration. But one of the first things to really understand is, how does one know that a certain service exists somewhere on some server over the internet? So how does that happen? I mean, there's no eureka moment that somebody comes and tells you that, hey, Jitendra, or hey Jigar, this service is going to exist. So whenever a SOAP integration happens, right, the service provider provides something which is called as a WSDL. So what is a WSDL? A WSDL is a file. Again, it's an XML file, and WSDL really stands for the Web Service Discovery Language, right? And this file, the WSDL file, really contains information about where is this service. First of all, what is this service? Where is this particular service located, right? What are the offerings this service has to offer, right? For example, we can have a simple math service where we are saying, you provide me the numbers, two numbers, and we are going to sum the two numbers and give you back the summation of those two numbers. So this is an example of a simple service that you could have, right? Now, if you're really making this service, or you really want to make this service available so that other systems can consume this service and make use of this service for their calculation, so that they do not have to implement the same logic which is already there, if already implemented as a part of service. All they have to do is make calls to these to these services which exist, and it gives them back the response. So web service discovery language is what helps us understand how these calls need to be made, and what are the specifics of those service. And in the demo we will see what a web service discovery language really, WSDL file really looks like, what does it contain, right? And we're going to be using one for our demo purpose. So with that understanding of SOAP, let's just get uh, into understanding how we can do this from as a part of Salesforce. Now, just like I talked about a Java system or a .NET based system or maybe a PHP system, you can also have Salesforce systems talk to external systems, right? And what we're really going to be doing here is, as a part of our demo, we're going to be consuming some external SOAP service which exists somewhere on some server, and we're going to consume that in Salesforce and see how we can really write some code around that service. So write some Apex code which is going to consume that service and give us some response. Okay. Now, the first and foremost piece in doing this is, so in my previous slide, I talked about what WSDL is, right? Now, once you, and WSDL is an essential element in consuming an external service. So every time you integrate any system or you're consuming any external service, an external service means a service which is written by uh, any external system or any external provider, or maybe a third party provider. uh, you know the essential element is that service provider will in some form hand over the WSDL file over to you. So that WSDL file is really made available to the consumer beforehand, so that he is able to um, uh, input that or leverage that, consume that at his end, and really become ready to perform calls to this service. Okay. Now, in order to be able to consume a direct WSDL file, okay, there is a utility which is already built in, and that utility is really referred to as the WSDL to Apex utility. The reason why it's referred to as the WSDL to Apex utility is because what this utility does is, uh, you take the WSDL file that was given to you as a part of the service, by the service provider, you input it to this utility, and this utility magically churns out native Apex classes on its own, right? So what does utility really does is it takes, so the WSDL file contains specifics of the service that is going to be consumed. It takes this particular WSDL file and converts it into a format that the native platform understands. In this case, because our platform is going to be Salesforce, what it does is it converts this WSDL into native Apex classes, so that the platform is able to understand how to consume this particular service. And we'll see in a moment how this can be done, right? So this is about the WSDL to Apex utility. It is a free utility. You do not have to enable anything on your Salesforce org. Okay, it's just available out of the box, as long as you have the necessary permissions to access and create Apex classes on your Salesforce org as a Salesforce user. You will be able to do this. So let's now jump right in and try to see how we can actually go about leveraging the WSDL to Apex utility and churn out Apex classes from that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is switch over to my Salesforce instance, and I'm going to make sure that you guys can see my screen. So I hope you should be able to see my screen now. I am right now in our Salesforce instance, and if you really see, I have, so basically, how did I get to the screen? All I have to do is click setup, and you know, then what I typed in is, within my quick find, I typed in Apex, and I choose the Apex classes option. So that is what enables me to reach this particular screen. Now, uh, this particular org has some classes which are already written by us as a part of some of the demos and some of the previous Path to Code sessions. Let's see how we can access the WSDL to Apex utility. So in order to access the WSDL to Apex utility, you see this button which says generate from WSDL. Okay, which means that it will, this is exactly the WSDL to Apex utility that I'm talking about. It is not that you've got to install anything or set up anything on your local machines or anything of that sort. So how do I go about creating Apex classes? So for the sake of a demo, I have a WSDL file which is already there, which already provided from one of the services, right? So let me just open up that file and show you how the file looks like, or how does a real WSDL look like. So a real WSDL, so this is what I did. I just opened it up in a Notepad++ editor, and this is what a WSDL looks like. Okay, so it has the element saying that what are the methods typically. It contains the type saying that what is the type of information that these elements belong to, right? And then it has message details, uh, what kind of binding. An important thing is it contains the port and the address details. So if you see, one of the key things is there's no magic happening over here. Okay, the file contains the location of the service, right? So this is where the service is actually hosted, and so by consuming or by providing you the WSDL file, the service provider is essentially giving you the address to reach out to for the results from a particular service. All right. So this is exactly what happens when when you get a WSDL file. So let's just go and consume this WSDL file in our Salesforce instance. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, it's let me just give you a background of what this service is. So this service is right now running on Heroku, and it just returns information about parks that exist in a certain country. So based on the country that you are passing in as an input, this particular service will give you the list of parks available. So what I'm going to do is use the generate from WSDL option, and then it's going to ask me to choose a file, the WSDL file from where I can generate the Apex code. So I'm going to choose the file, and I will pick it up from my desktop. So I'm going to say choose the parks.wsdl file, and I'm going to say parse WSDL. So the first step in using this utility is to point to the file or choose the file. It's as good as uploading any other file to a Google Drive or a Dropbox. And then you say parse, which means that the Apex runtime engine will really parse or really sniff out the information that is there within the WSDL file that we just opened up, right? And if everything goes well, it's going to tell me that the parsing was successful and there are no errors, right? And then it'll ask me to provide it with a name. So what we're going to say is we will rename this particular class with saying park service. Okay, so this is the class which does not exist as of now, and what should be created if the parsing, I mean, if the class is generated from this WSDL file. Okay, uh, a, a key thing to mention over here: make sure that your class names are unique. So let's say if there is already a class with a park service name, you will essentially receive an error, and the system will prompt you saying that this class already exists, please use a unique name. So just make sure when you're doing that, right? And now what I'm going to do is just say generate Apex code. So automatically this will result in creating two classes. Okay, every WSDL will end up creating two classes. One is a regular class, which is regular for regular synchronous communication, and another is an async park service class or an async class, which is used typically for async communication. Okay, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous communication, for just for people to understand, is when two entities are communicating with each other, and when one system asks for a response and waits for that response to come back immediately and does not perform any other operation until the response is received, is called as synchronous communication. Asynchronous communication typically is when one system reaches out to the other system with a request for some information, and once the information is sent over, what details of the request are sent over to the system continues to perform its tasks without really waiting for the information. And whenever that information is received in near future, after a certain point in time, uh, this, there is some kind of capability where that system is able to understand that, and the requested information has now been received, and you can further go and use that in your business logic or processing. So that's what async or async sync and async really mean. Okay, what we're going to do is now just finish off this process, and if you really see, there should be two classes which should be generated. So there is an async park service class and there is a park service class. Just to open up this particular class, so what I did was I just clicked on the park service, and I'm trying to see what is the Apex code that is generated as a part of that park service class, which was generated from the WSDL. So this is what the park service class looks like, and these are some of the details that are contained within that service class. Okay, now you have your first step, which means done, which means that you have consumed the service on your side, right? So we've consumed the external park service. Now the next step here is to use this service in some of your business logic or business processing, so that you can make calls to this service and get information out of the service, right? So what I'm going to do is, because we'll have to write some Apex code, I'm going to switch over to the dev console now, and I'm going to open up the dev console. Let me just close. So there's some old code. I'm just going to close it over, and I'm going to create a new class, new Apex class, which is now going to be consuming this particular service. Okay. So what I'm really going to do over here is I'm going to now start writing a park locator class, which is going to consume a service, and this service is going to be the service that we just uh, uh, created as an Apex class from the WSDL file that we had. So we're going to be writing a similar piece of code. So let's just switch over to the editor, and I presume everybody is able to see my editor. So we're going to be start writing a park locator service. As a part of the park locator service, what we're really going to do is we're going to be writing a small method within this class, just to make sure we can access some information as a part of from the service. So we're going to be writing a simple public static method, which is get parks by country. Okay, so this method is what it is essentially going to do is give me a list of parks, right? But what I need to do is, because I'm going to provide, or the service provides parks by a country name. I need to provide an input to this particular method. So I'm going to provide an input as the country name, right? And then I'm going to now call the park service that we had used. So the way you call the service in this particular case, the SOAP service, is you have recall the name of the class that you created. Okay, the class that you created from the WSDL. So that is park service, right? And as a part of the park service, I have an implementation port, right? So this parks IMPL port, this is the type which actually contains the implementation or the details of response. Now, if you just want to verify that, what you can simply do is just open up the park service, what we have here, park service class in this editor, just to get a sense of which is that method which is actually containing all the details. So if you see, parks IMPL port is what really is doing the communication. Okay, the rest of the methods are more stubs, which means what do you mean by stubs? They are just the skeleton of the methods that are actually implemented on at the service side, or from the provider who has given you this WSDL. But what it essentially tells you is what is the type of information it accepts, what is the type of information it returns back, right? So it just gives you the stubs, but doesn't really have the actual implementation, whereas this particular method is the one that has the actual implementation. So that's the reason why we're going to use this method. Now, how did I get to know this? I got to know this because essentially in this case, the service is developed by me, but in the real world, what happens is usually there is a documentation that is sent over as a part of the WSDL to understand and decipher what are the methods that you can call, what is the request format, and what is the response format, what is it that you will get back. So usually that documentation is what the service provider provides. If you're really having a bad day and you don't really have that documentation, good luck. What you'll really have to do is you'll have to go to open up the WSDL service and really look at the structure, and then make a call, or understand as to which is the method that is being used, and then use that to make calls from your Salesforce Apex code. Okay, so I'm saying Park service instance. So this piece of code is very similar. It is as good as, now what we're really doing is creating an instance, and right, like a regular class that I would have on the Apex side. So and I'm going to use the new keyword. I'm going to say, so from this point onwards, it's very straightforward, because it's like almost making a call to another local Apex class that exists on your Salesforce instance. Okay, now as a part of this, what I'm going to do is, so now that I have created an instance, okay, I am able to access this by country method, which is implemented and which accepts the parameter as a string and returns a list of uh, uh, a list of strings uh, by returned by the service, which are nothing but the names of the parks. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a call to this, right? There is one thing we forgot though, is provide the return type. And in this case, because the return type is going to be a string, it's an array of strings, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a string, an array of strings, and that's going to be my return type. Okay, so what I'm going to say is, say return park service by country. Let's see what the error is. We've not provided any value, and that's the for arg0. So what it is telling me is it needs some kind of input to be provided, so that it can, because that is what is the service, that is what the service is expecting, right? So what we're going to do is, we already have an input here, we're going to use the same variable, right? So anybody who's making a call to this class which is written by us, they are going to be using uh, they're going to be actually having access to this methods, right? Where you have really abstracted the call to the service, but in reality what you're really doing is making a call to the class generated from the WSDL file, and the class here knows how to communicate with that service. Okay, so this is how you can directly use the Apex classes within your from a WSDL from a SOAP WSDL, and use that to really uh, uh, you know um, use that as a part of your business logic to perform the necessary computation. In this case, it's just you know a service that returns some strings, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to make sure this compiles, right? And now we're going to make sure that this runs. Okay, so in order to test, what I'm going to do is go over to my execute anonymous window. Okay, and I'm going to make a call to the park locator class, which is our class, right? And because this is a static method, I really don't need to make an instance. All I'm going to do is class name dot method name and provide it with an input. Now, as we have defined, we're saying that this particular method accepts a string parameter. So we're going to go over and provide a name of the method. So we're going to say, let's say maybe Germany. Okay. And we've also got to keep a track of what is this method returning. So our method is typically returning a string. So our variable that we're going to hold is also going to be a string. So we're going to be say a park list. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is print this. Okay. So as to know that we are really getting back a response. And let's see if this works. So everything is fine. You consume the class, everything is okay. Let's see if this generates some output in the debug log. So I'm going to say execute, everything looks okay. Let's say execute. Oh, but there's an exception. What's that? So what this particular error is really telling me is that when you write external services, or when you make calls to external services, any external service which resides outside the Salesforce domain, and Salesforce doesn't really understand that, Salesforce will not allow you to make calls, because essentially this is from a security perspective, because they do not want any program or piece of code making inadvertent calls to any external system, right, so as to have a security breach. So what does it tell you? It tells you that it is an unauthorized endpoint, and that you need to make sure that Salesforce understands it and it allows you to make a call, which is called as generally termed as a process of whitelisting. Okay, so when you whitelist, just like you whitelist IPs, you will also need to whitelist endpoint URLs in your Salesforce instance before you can make calls to them. So how do you whitelist URLs? All you have to do is copy the URL, because this is the endpoint which has a problem. I'm going to say okay. All right, and I'm going to close this window and now switch back to my Salesforce instance and navigate to my setup. Okay, and I'm going to search for something called as remote site settings. Okay, so remote site settings are something that is actually a repository for every Salesforce instance, and keeps a track of which are the external URLs that the programs written on the force.com platform can make legitimate calls to. Now, because we have not whitelisted the URL that we're trying to make calls to, that's the reason why the error. So what we're going to do is we're going to say create a new remote site, and we're going to add the URL over here, and I'm going to say park service. Okay, I'm just going to keep the default selection and say save. Oops, okay, it just doesn't accept a space. It's a one word, so I'm just going to keep it simple. Okay, so now the service, so we have registered the service or the external URL. This holds true for any external URL that you are communicating with. Unless Salesforce really understands about this URL, you will not be able to go out and make calls to this. So now let's just quickly jump in jump back to our developer instance and now use the same piece of Apex code. Now that we have registered, this should execute and we should get back a response, hopefully if the service is up. So let's just say execute. Okay, so the log is opening, and let's see if we have something in our debug statements. I'm going to filter out my debug statement, and yes, what we have done is we've successfully made a call to the park service which we consumed via the WSDL, right? So we did that by making a call to our uh, park service, right? And that's what in turn called the actual service and got us back the response. Okay, if you really see, this is not mentioned anywhere. Like, it's not hard coded, so I'm not really making this all up. The class actually went out, made a call to the endpoint and got back the response. Okay, so this is how you typically make calls to an external service, consume an external service and make calls to that. Now the last piece in our implementation, or in a SOAP implementation, or in any kind of SOAP implementation, is about writing test classes. Now why is this such a big deal? Because when you really end up writing test classes, for people who do not really have a background and have been joining us today, there's already a session, episode 5 I believe, which explains what is what is unit testing and how to write test classes. So I'll not get into the basics there, but a special thing about test classes is you cannot make calls to call outs, okay, or you cannot make calls to external services within a test class. So that is something which is not permitted. However, the challenge that you have is you've already generated an Apex class, right, which is a regular Apex class from the WSDL, right? And eventually, if you want your code on production to be able to use this, you will have to port this class to your production instance. And as a part of the Salesforce mandate, no class, or you basically cannot perform a deployment if the overall code coverage is less than 75%. So if your overall code coverage is really higher, you may be able to port this class to production, but eventually that will result in your overall code coverage really going down. So how do you really add or provide code coverage, or write test classes for the classes that are generated from as a part of the WSDL? How do you do that? Because that is a key element in doing this. So because you really cannot perform callouts, what you're going to do is you're going to emulate them. And in order to do that, what you're really going to do is you already have an interface available, which is called as the web service mock interface. So this is something which is given to you by the Salesforce platform. All you got to do is implement this interface and provide the implementation to the method which is given as a part of this interface. And then we'll see how we can really uh, use that mock implementation as a part of your test class. So what the first step, what we're going to do is, um, I'm just going to, because I have this code already written, I'm just going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to make use of this code. So I'm going to go back to my developer console, okay, and make a new Apex class called as Park Service Mock. Now what this class is going to do is this class is going to implement a web service mock, which is the interface that we're talking about. So in order to in order to implement an interface, the syntax goes, you mention the class name as it is, but you add the implements keywords and you specify the name of the interface that really needs to be implemented. Now, as a part of that implementation, what you need to do is do invoke is a standard method that is included as a part of the interface. Okay, so you need to provide a concrete implementation and you need to write the implementation for that. So this is a standard syntax. These are the standard set of parameters, that need to be provided over here. So we really don't need to worry about this. Okay. Uh, Key thing is these classes need to be marked as global so that they are available across, right? And what we really need to understand is we are setting a mock, or we are creating a mock response, which means we are emulating the response from the actual service. Okay, and what really I'm doing is I'm saying there is a country response parameter that is available within my park service class. Okay, so basically this what I'm first doing is I'm creating an instance of the park service class, and sorry, there is a return underscore x variable which exists in my park service class. So let me just go back and show that to you. So yeah, so the return x variable, it's going to be somewhere over here, right? So return x is the variable that is being set as a part of the the service, or that is what is actually making the callouts, or because there is an invoke method which does all of this, right, and gives you back the response in this particular variable, and in this particular type, and return x is a variable of that particular type. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make or set the variable with my custom response. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say set this variable with some of this hard-coded content. So we really won't end up making calls, but we will return we'll emulate the content. Right? Similarly, right now I'm just considering one case, it's a success case, but you will also have failure responses and you'll have to emulate that as well. So you can do that in a similar fashion, or put some conditional branching and make sure that that is accounted for. Then what you do is you put, so like I said, there is a response underscore x parameter which is available, and which is what is contained in the service class. So I'm going to say that the response uh, the response element is what will contain our custom element. So this is how you really implement a web service mock, right? Now what we're going to do is, right, so this is what you have done here is you have defined the custom response for your soap service, or you're emulating that, which will be used when you are writing your test classes. Okay, now what we're going to do is write a new test class, right, for park locator, and I'm going to say or call that park locator as the park locator test classes. Let me just make sure if I have that ready as well. Yeah, I have that ready, so I'm just going to use that. So I'm going to say park locator test, create a new class. Make sure that I save this. I hope it is saved. Yeah, there are no errors. Let's create the park locator test class. Okay, and a part of this park locator test class. So now what I'm really doing is in this particular class. So this is the actual class or actual test class for my park locator uh, class that I have custom created, which is actually making a call to the park service class, which is the actual service, the SOAP service that we consumed, and giving us back the response. So what I'm saying is I'm writing a test method, and the first thing to do is to ensure that this particular uh, the first statement is using this test.setMock, which means that you're setting the context of the mock class, and you're telling the runtime that, hey, that if you encounter a web service call that is being made, make sure that you return the information that is included as a part of the mock class. Okay, the reason why I believe there is an error, and that's because of the method name. So we're going to make sure that I'll just change the method name. Okay, and I think it should be okay now. Okay, yeah, should be good now. So I'm passing some parameter. I'm I'm setting the context of the mock class, right? And now what I'm doing is I'm evaluating. What we will also do is let's just write a system.debug statement to understand what is being returned. So ideally, what should be returned is the implementation from our mock, and it should be test park 1, 2, 3. Okay. So what I'm going to do is just print out the test park list just to see what is being returned. Okay. All right. We're just going to save. Okay. So everything is fine. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this test and let's see if we're getting the desired output, and if this will ensure that this is actually testing out the park locator class and making sure that it has the right kind of code coverage. Okay. So all I'm going to do is say run test. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that, so there was no other test. So the test successfully ran. Okay. It did verify the test park service callout method and everything is okay. If you even see the code coverage for these classes, the park locator and the park service classes, now it is making sure that all the lines are covered. Okay. And this is how you typically use or use the web service mock interface to implement mock interface or implement a mocking framework, or emulate the responses from the service. Now let's go back and check, because there will also be a log generated, right? Let's open up the log and see if we get to see the content that we had returned as a part of the mock class. And if you really see, the debug statement is now showcasing Park 1, Park 2, Park 3, which means that it is really referring to the mock response and not the actual response from the web service. Okay. So with that, I'll quickly jump over to one key discussion, one key aspect, which is when do you, okay, let me just make sure I switch back to my slide deck. Okay, hopefully everybody should be able to see this. So this is a guideline that we've prepared based on my experience as to when you should, what helps you differentiate a SOAP and a REST. Often when you have a question of whether you would be implementing a SOAP or a REST, by default, or most of the times the preference is implementing a REST service, because most of the people know about a REST service and very few people know about the SOAP services. In fact, all the platforms that you end up integrating with today, for example, if you're talking about Facebook or Twitter or any of the uh, social platforms or any of the services, most of them, 90% of them are implemented as a REST service, right? So most of them feel that REST is the only format, and that is why it becomes the de facto choice. But SOAP has its own advantages. So there are situations and reasons, but you have to understand the nitty-gritties. So basically, there's an essential difference in the protocol. Uh, and what I mean by there is an essential difference is web communication is stateless, which means that uh, if you have a value in a text box, right, and you refresh the on a web page and you refresh that web page, the value is not persisted. It's not stored anywhere unless you make an explicit effort to do that, right? With REST, that is true, because the value of the variables between the requests to subsequent requests is not actually persisted as a part of the representational state transfer. However, as a part of SOAP, because everything is more local in terms of generating a native class, right? Uh, the state can be maintained to an extent, right? So that is where a SOAP comes in beneficial. But does that mean that we now say that we end up using SOAP everywhere instead of REST? No, that's not true. SOAP operates with an XML data exchange format, whereas REST generally uses JSON, although some of the other formats, even like XML, are supported. However, but with SOAP, XML is the only format. So there is a rigidity there. JSON is much more friendlier. Okay. Uh, One big turn down or a key turn off is with soap there is a high maintenance, which means that like we said that every time you want to do a soap integration, you need to have the WSDL file from the service provider. The service consumer has to have that. So now think of this situation where the service provider gave you a file with this Spark service, and you implemented, incorporated that into your implementation, and then you started to write your logic. Everything's working fine, great. Now in the real world, what happens is the provider will also make changes at his end. Which means that he might add a few methods, he might change a few methods, he might add some new features. What happens is every time you have to do this, you will have to end up consuming the WSDL file at the consumer side, which means that it could also affect your existing implementations. Okay, so carrying forward a change from the service provider to a consumer is a little tedious in SOAP, versus that is very easy in REST, because you're not really exchanging files in REST. It's typically an endpoint URL. So what can be done is, if you just point the same URL in REST to a different resource, or that is all you have to do. Okay, the new change can be easily accommodated. Okay, so that's the reason why it is low maintenance. Some of the sample use cases where a SOAP may be beneficial. So if you're really writing an integration which involves heavy data exchanges, a lot of data being exchanged between the two systems, right? Then SOAP might be a better choice as compared to REST, because that is typically used or made available for lightweight data exchanges. Writing a public API, just like maybe you're talking to a Twitter API or maybe a Facebook API, that's a REST API, right? So REST would be a good choice there. If you have an essential back and forth communication, so one system sends a request, then it sends a response out to the system, and then there is another. So there's a continuous exchange. Then REST might be a better option as compared to SOAP. So this is a guideline. Again, there's no rigidity, like I said. This is just based on my experience with integration, where SOAP and REST is sometimes essential and helps you make a choice. Okay, at the end of the day, any solution that fits the need and helps solve the problem is the solution of your choice. So this is just to enable you to make a better choice. And with that, I come to the end of my session. Just walk you through some resources which you can use to dwell further into this topic of building SOAP integration. So there is an Apex developer guide which beautifully explains what SOAP services are, which also talks about how you can really use web service callouts, which is what we just saw in the demo today. And there is a blog from Salesforce itself talking about the WSDL to Apex generator and the different features around that. So this is more the theory part, and people who want to write some integration and become a little more hands-on with the SOAP integration, and even for that matter, even the REST integration, which is covered by Jitendra in the last session. These are some of the great Trailhead modules which are available. There's Lightning Platform API Basics, and there's Apex Integration Services module, which you can really use to brush up your knowledge and become a pro at writing SOAP or any other kind of integration with Salesforce. And yeah, with that, we'll try to come over to the Q&A. I did see a lot of questions being asked, so I'm just going to pause my share and go out and refer to the questions in the chat window and hopefully see if some of these questions, I believe Jitendra has already started answering them. So thank you, Jitendra.
Hey Jigar, good session. Thank you so much. It's too much information. I guess team has to go back and see the recording. But overall, good session, good content. There is one question, right? And we would like to hear from you. So let's say if one WSDL have multiple methods. So the question is, how would we know that what are the methods are exposed in that WSDL?
Right. So great question. Thank you for asking that question, first of all. So usually what happens is, like I said, and that's a typical scenario. What happens in the real world is when you get a WSDL file, it's not just with one method. It definitely has a lot of more methods. One is you will see the prototypes. Even if you actually see over here, um, uh, so let me just switch back. I'm going to resume my share. I'm going to switch back to my Salesforce instance. So I'm going to switch over to the Park service which gets generated. So if you have multiple methods, so in fact, I was only using the by country method. In this case, also you have multiple methods. Okay. So any method that you ever have in a WSDL file is always a stub. By a stub, what do we mean by a stub? A stub is just a representation. It's just uh, a blueprint saying that this is what the method demands and this is what it is going to return. Okay, so if you have, like, instead of 2 you've got 5 methods, you'll have 5 method stubs. Okay, in order to decipher, usually a WSDL or any kind of service that is provided by a provider, right, is always backed up by documentation, because that is, it is like trying to decipher somebody's class that is written and trying to understand what is the what is this method expecting and what is the response that it is getting. So this is a very crude way of saying, because we have a really simple version of a WSDL. uh, I can really make out that there are these 2 stubs, but yeah, in the real world it gets much more complex. So always ask for the respective documentation which tells you that what is this method expecting. Okay, what are the basically what this contains is the signature of the methods. So the request type, the return type, um, that's what it contains, and it will always have one common method which will be the point of communication. So in this case, it is our method. It is not the actual method that is implementing the business logic of this service, but it is actually the communication or the gateway between this local Apex class and the actual remote service that is running at this location. Okay, so if you really have these methods, or if you really have multiple methods, these are the ways in which you can really decipher what these methods are and how you can really understand what they are expecting. I hope that answers your question.
And just to add, Jigar, to your point, right? Normally, what I do is I use a SOAP API tool. Sorry, SOAP UI. So in SOAP UI, you can import WSDL, and maybe in the next session, I can show in next 5-10 minutes, whenever we have time, that how to identify the methods and what are the expectations on those methods. So that's really so Postman is used for REST API mostly, and for
Right.
WSDL we use the SOAP UI tool.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, teams. I think we are 9 minutes over the time.
Yeah.
Question is, do we still want to see how to generate a metadata using Excel sheet, or do you want me to publish a YouTube video? Or what I can do is, I will start sharing my screen. I will cover that topic. Anyone interested, stay, and otherwise I will, anyways, I'm going to publish this video. So in this video, we will have that demo. Awesome. So, Jigar, do you have anything share before I take control?
No, I think the only thing is we have a leaderboard, and I think some of the people are doing awesome on that leaderboard. So keep continue with your enthusiasm, and thank you for being such a patient audience. We ran over with the time, and I know that it was a lot of information to grasp in an hour's time, but I hope this is useful, and feel free to reach out to me even after the session if you have doubts or if you have questions that I can help you answer. So thank you, Jitendra.
Sure, Jigar. Thank you so much to you. Actually, you put a lot of effort and time to prepare the content and slide. So everybody appreciate your effort, Jigar.
Thanks, Jitendra.
Yeah. So let me quickly share my screen, and you can confirm if you are able to see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. So this is what I have done, right? In this last year, Dreamforce, I created a plugin as a hobby. And this plugin actually generates metadata in Excel sheet. Okay, so I would be doing everything step by step. Should not even take 5 minutes to generate a metadata using VS Code. So all you have to do is go on my blog, go to this GitHub repository. Okay, click here, clone and download, copy this URL, open command prompt. So in my case, I'm going to open terminal. I'm going to change to the folder desktop. I will create a directory. I will say path to code 3. I will change to that directory. So now I'm in that directory. All I have to do is now run a command, git, and again this is just one time, git clone, and that URL which we copied. So this is the URL I have copied, and everything which I'm explaining right now is in here. So you need to have a git installed, you need to have SFDX installed. We just completed step number 1. So now everything is here, and as you can see, this folder got created. Okay. Now all I have to do is open my VS Code, click on open folder. I will go on this folder, schema exporter, and then in this terminal I have to run this command. Very simple command. And again, this command only you have to do one time. So step 1 and step 2 is only one time, and step 3 is then you can start using any way you want. Just run this command which says SFDX plugins length, and that's all. Now I am getting an error because I already have this plugin installed, but still it's trying to install. But that's fine. You can install that same plugin every time. So as you can see, it is Salesforce SFDX is doing some magic, and basically this is a plugin. Once you have everything in place, you can open your any VS Code, any SFDX project, and you can simply run that command. So now what we have to do is, you simply have to run this command. Okay, and let me explain what that command means. So this command is SFDX schema build. You have to give your org name. My org name right now is GT11. I have 20 other orgs. You can use any org. I am saying that I want to export these 3 objects, user, account, lead, and I want to export it at this location. So basically what I will do is, okay, my location is already here, I guess. Give me 1 minute. I will schema build. I will just cheat because I'm so lazy to. So this is my location, okay? And in Windows operating system, you have to give your Windows location. If you are using Jenkins, you have to give the relative location in Jenkins. If you have CI/CD tool, in Mac, I'm giving this location, and I'm saying Excel sheet I have to generate, and let's say name of the Excel sheet is path to code demo 1. Now that's it. Ignore that error because like I said, I have already installed this plugin multiple times, but still this plugin will run fine. So now it is extracting every information one by one. It generated a file named path to code demo1.xl. I go here, path to code demo.xl. This is the file it has generated. As you can see, all the informations are here, objects are here, user, as you can see, all the label, name, if there's any help text, is it standard or custom, everything would be extracted. If that's a pick list, it will give you all the pick list in column M with all the other information. If you want to have the extract of whole org, all you have to do is then do not provide -o. O stands for object and P stands for path. So I'm saying, okay, no object. Now what it will do is, it is going to go in your org, extract every standard custom object, whatever it can find in your org, and it is going to generate an Excel sheet. Now, my org, I mean, everybody org has a lot of information like Apex class, standard objects and everything. So it will take some time, but eventually it will generate the Excel sheet. So that's all how this plugin works. I would request your feedback. I am planning to add the support for workflow validation rule, process builder, and approval process. I can't commit when, but very soon. So if you have any feedback, feel free to post on my blog. And if you need some support, I'm always here. Open for questions, everybody. So very simple, right? Again, I am going to post this video. Very simple step. So you on step 1 and step 2 is only one time, okay? And then step 3 you can run from any VS Code project, and you will get your Excel sheet with all the metadata information. Everybody is silent.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure this microphone worked. Yeah, that's really neat. What language do you use to write plugins for?
Very good question. So it's a JavaScript. Means
Oh, okay.
it's a Node.js, but and again this is a completely open source code. You can go ahead and anytime change my name. You can say created by your name or whatever, right? Everything is here. Okay. You can go ahead. You can change font color. You can change font size, right? Uh, and everything is. I mean, anytime you change it, and when you run this plugin, it will get your updated code and it will run. So if you can see, right? Jitendra Jha, you can change by your name, schema exporter, right? Everything is available open source. Okay. And as you can see, it's a Node.js, which is nothing but a JavaScript. Okay. I am using Excel for Node component. And like if you see, if you read my heading in my blog claims that you can build a plugin in 15 minutes. And if you want to understand how to create a plugin, this is all the step. Salesforce, this command will give you all the boilerplate. Now you go on that command and do whatever. So I use this boilerplate and then I added some of my code. So you don't have to write any code related to how to log in, how to log out, how to decide REST API versus tooling API, all supported by VS Code, SFDX. Okay. So if you see my code, this is the one class which I have created. If you see all my custom logic and very small, right? So 169 here, it seems, but it's really, if you see most of the line I have header, I have done header name and everything. Main class is build.ts. Here you can see which request I'm calling. So I'm calling REST API for S object. I'm calling REST API to get all the object name and everything, right? Then I'm iterating for each object. I'm getting their field information, and then what I'm doing is I'm just putting that those field information in the map and set in collection. Okay, so it seems it's generated. Let's see here.
I actually wrote a utility, not as fancy as this. But it's after you've already extracted. It's just for profiles and permission sets.
Okay.
To make it easier to see what are all the things granted by them. This was just just for the nonprofit I'm helping to support as an admin, because
Awesome.
they wanted to know. Well, they wanted to use a bunch of permission sets and profiles, and they didn't really know, because at a glance you can't really tell and I know there are JavaScript utilities out there that lets you see in a browser, lets you compare profiles, but she wanted to see it in Excel sheets.
Right. So
yeah.
I also created one utility, but of course I cannot share that because of my employer. But what that did is that was comparing field with each page layout, and it will tell you if the field has been used in page layout or not, and then it will compare your profile and everything. So I do intend to extend this plugin other than just workbook. Maybe if I get some time, I can do something like that. And if you know that a plugin which you're talking about, right? If you can share with all of us, that would be great.
Well, it's not. See, I'm still learning JavaScript, and actually, it just is it your opinion that now with Lightning, and especially with Lightning Web Components, to be a successful developer in Salesforce, now you must really be proficient in JavaScript over everything else. Is
Very
that
good point. So I will tell you about myself, right? JavaScript right now it's a ECMAScript 6, right? So the thing is, right, nobody knows everything in and out about any programming language like JavaScript, right? So normally how I do is I just know the basics of JavaScript, okay? And if anything comes up, then again, like everybody else, I use Google or the Stack Exchange to go into. So for an example, right, I didn't really knew how to generate an Excel sheet using Node.js. So I literally spent around 1 week identifying what is the right library. But then I identified that the right library is this one,
mm-hmm.
Excel. Where is that one? I think it's here.
But
Yeah,
also, I don't know. I've read that recently that some people are saying forget about even getting proficient in Visualforce. You know, the future of Salesforce development is going to require that everybody get really good at JavaScript and of course know how to use Lightning.
I I agree, and I think it happens because of 2-3 years back. I will tell you because of 3-4 reasons. Number one, Node.js launched, okay, which is on the basis of V8 engine of Google Chrome. Then React launched, AngularJS launched, Polymer launched. So these big libraries, right, 4-5 years back, those are launched. That's how the JavaScript, I mean, it's kind of the JavaScript got its soul and strength back. Because if you talk about few years back, around 2011 and 10, everybody was saying, okay, JavaScript is not the future. So I think because of these library, yes, JavaScript is the future. If you want to become good, even in Salesforce and any other technology, we do need to learn at least some of the basics of JavaScript.
Thank you, Jitendra.
Yeah, no problem. So this tool is in front of you, right? Go ahead, play with it, download it, okay? If you have any feedback, if you want any feature to be added, comment on my blog. Your comment will motivate me and I will add more and more features. Thank you. Have a nice time, everyone. Thank you, Jigar.
Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, guys. You have been a great audience. Thank you so much. Have a
Yeah.
good day.
Sugar.
Thanks. Bye-bye.